It's a pleasure to be here this evening. It's a pleasure to have such a group of people in the audience who come from many nations, and that's always an asset for a diplomat, that you have a multinational gathering. It's a big bonus because normally, obviously, as ambassador to Germany, I tend to address German audiences, so it's really a pleasure to have a chance to meet a diverse audience like the one that we have here this evening. I want to thank Mark Dunfried and his team at the Institute for inviting me to the conference. I like what Mark and his colleagues are doing at the Institute for two reasons. First of all, I guess I'm temperamentally a devotee of soft power solutions, personally. I've had a lot of experience over the years of doing cultural diplomacy. I remember as the third secretary in New Delhi, I gave a talk to the All India English Teachers Association on the Irish poet W.B. Yeats. And I turned up at the conference expecting to have an audience of about this size. But of course, India is a large country, and there were 2,000 people in the audience. So that was my first venture into cultural diplomacy. So I'm very happy to talk about the subject. And also, coming from a small country like Ireland, we naturally tend to favour soft power because that's where we have the capacity to influence the world around us. When it comes to hard power, a small country like Ireland has very little resources to call upon in terms of hard power. Also, I think, as a small country, we tend to be very conscious of the limits of hard power in today's world. We've seen, I think, in many places that hard power looks very effective, but may not deliver the goods in the longer term. I'm not sure I really like the term nation branding. It smacks a little bit too much of the commercialization of a very precious commodity, which is the image of a nation. Nations are, after all, unique human creations which are shaped over time by a multitude of influences. And the word branding maybe tends to reduce all of this to a commercial transaction or a commercial operation, a marketing ploy. I probably prefer the phrase enhancing our national reputation, but I accept that sounds a bit heavy perhaps, so I'm willing to use the word branding for the sake of shorthand. Let me just also say to you that much of what we might call nation branding takes place without any input from government or from diplomats. For example, when Irish singers and musicians tour the world, they do so because there's a demand for their performances. U2 do not go on tour to promote Ireland. They go on tour because people want to see their performances and they're prepared to buy tickets for that purpose. But in doing so, our singers and musicians, and probably for a country of our size, we have a disproportionate number of artists that are world artists that are touring globally. And in doing their work of performing and entertaining their audiences, they're also, incidentally, generating positive images of Ireland. Most people probably know that Bono and U2 are Irish, and they wear their Irishness on their sleeves, and they're quite proud of it. So that's why I say that a lot of what happens in terms of nation branding happens without the input of government. And I think governments have to be modest, have to understand that they have a role to play, but the nation is branded in a myriad of ways, and only some of those activities are relevant to the sphere of government. Smaller nations are faced, I think, with particular challenges. I just wanted to make the point, this is a shot of the Skellig Vihil, which is the Skellig Michael, which is a medieval monastery about 12 miles or 20 kilometres off the west coast, the southwest coast of Ireland. And this is where Irish monks went in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries to find an isolated place where they could contemplate and where they could pray and create these wonderful manuscripts that we now have in our libraries and museums. But the point I make here is that the landscape of a country is a very big part of the country's brand. And there isn't much you can do about your landscape. It's what you get from nature. Of course, you can destroy it with ugly buildings, but the landscape is a fundamental feature of a national brand. And most people, when they think about Ireland, they think about the western seaboard of Ireland, the Atlantic coast, the cliffs, the waves, and the islands like the Skellig Michael and the ancient Celtic tradition. So when it comes to nation branding, smaller nations have particular challenges to face. And this is a quotation from a recent paper produced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Dublin. And it makes the point that a major challenge for small and medium-sized states is receiving recognition from the rest of the world for who they claim to be. In other words, the world may have an image, it may be crude, it may be based on out-of-date information or images. And the key thing is that we want to be known for who we claim to be. We want our own interpretation of our national identity to be recognized and valued by people around the world. And the point is made here that the fate of small and medium-sized countries is that their image is characterized by a lack of information or by a long-established stereotype. And public diplomacy, therefore, for larger countries may be based on rebranding or changing images. But for many small countries, the central problem of public diplomacy is the problem of invisibility. Many countries have a very limited image or a very limited visibility for the realities of their countries. That doesn't mean those countries are any less interesting, significant, important, fascinating. But there are a lot of countries out there, and it's a crowded marketplace, and there is the problem of trying to find a way of presenting the brand that you want to project in the world, presenting that effectively so that it captures attention. And one of the big problems for smaller countries is how do you go about capturing attention when you're up against bigger countries with a lot more resources to devote to the promotion of the national image? How do you go about attracting attention and capturing and making your country more visible? This is, unfortunately, I wanted to show an image of what it is that we Irish hold dear. And I had here a very interesting 30-second clip of a hurling game, which is a game only played in Ireland, which is played with 15-a-side. There's a men's game and there's a women's game, so it's played by everyone in Ireland. We played at school, and the key thing about this game is that it's only played in Ireland, and it is, together with Gaelic football, a football game only played in Ireland. These are the two most important spectator sports in Ireland. And ours is the only country in Europe that I'm aware of that has two national games exclusive to our country that are the number one and number two spectator sports in modern Ireland. And this is a product of the survival in Ireland of old Gaelic traditions which have disappeared from other parts of the world. So it's the fact that we're an island nation We've managed to preserve some of the old traditions, and the key for us now is to try to combine those old traditions with the reality of a modern, pluralistic country. And I wanted to just show you an image of hurling. Maybe they'll be able to download the image for me, and I might be able to show it to you before the end of my talk. But the point I make is that these games, when the finals are played in September of each year, the games attract 85,000 people to the big stadium in Dublin. And Croke Park in Dublin is the largest stadium in Europe. It has a capacity of 85,000. And this is for a national game only played in Ireland and played by amateur players who represent their local areas. And you can only represent your area if you're born in that area. So in other words, no transfer system, no professionalism. And that, I think, is an image of the kind of country we are. Of course, it's not easy to project that because most people outside of Ireland know nothing about hurling or Gaelic football. The point I wanted to make is that some things that are really vital to us, it's hard to project them because this game is only played in Ireland and therefore it doesn't have a following worldwide. The other thing I wanted to do was I had this 30-second clip. I had a sound file there as well, which plays traditional Irish music. Now, there's an example of something that is native to Ireland, is only found in Ireland, but it has attracted an audience all over the world. And any day, in most German cities, you will find small groups of Irish musicians playing Irish music. In fact, I know many Germans, born in Germany, their whole lives lived in Germany, who play Irish music at a very, very high level of skill. So the music has actually been a very important way of branding Ireland as a lively country with its own unique traditions, which are at the same time quite accessible to people outside of Ireland. Because the music is lively, it's catchy, it is capable of generating fans and enthusiasts all over the world, and particularly in Germany. So we like to try to present our country as a combination of the traditional and the modern. And this is a very good example of, because the elements of our culture that are unique to Ireland are Gaelic games, hurling and Gaelic football, Irish traditional music, Irish dancing that most people know through river dance and similar shows, and the Gaelic language, the Irish language. Now here is the Irish language website on Twitter. So here you have the oldest vernacular language in Europe, with examples, written examples, going back to the 8th century, which are actually to be found in Würzburg in Germany. And this language is now using Facebook and Twitter in order to present itself to a 21st century audience. That's a good example of what we're trying to do to combine the traditional and the modern. So we like to view ourselves as an advanced country with a high technology economy and a tolerant, multicultural society imbued with a positive combination of modernity and traditional values. It's not easy, obviously, to present a complex picture of a society. Stereotypes are far more straightforward. They're far easier to communicate. But the complexity of any modern society is more difficult to put across effectively. Aside from the Gaelic-speaking character of Ireland, the Gaelic character, which gives Ireland its distinctiveness, and we recognise that the Irish brand is conditioned by the distinctive elements that are part of our culture. The language, the music, the dance. These are the things that make us unique in the European context. However, we also have another asset, which is the fact that we are part of the English-speaking world. And the advantage of being part of the English-speaking world is that English has become the global language for the last 50 years probably, mainly through the impact of American culture. But nonetheless, we in Ireland benefit from the fact that the principal language of global culture, especially now with the internet, is a language that we ourselves have as a native Irish language, because the English language has been in Ireland for as long as it's been in England. So it is a language that belongs to Ireland, and we like to think that we occupy a distinctive place within the English-speaking world. We're English-speaking. Most of us have English as our mother tongue. But we have a particular way of using the English language. So we have a distinctive voice in English. And we believe that that also is an asset to us. Because when Germans or people from any other part of the world go to Ireland, they can access Irish culture directly, because the likelihood is that most people visiting our country will have English as a second language, which means that, unlike in other countries, unless they happen to know that country's language, they can access Irish culture. They can speak directly to Irish people. And this is a big advantage for a country like ours. I'll give you another example. I once walked through the bookshop at the international airport in Kuala Lumpur when I was ambassador to Southeast Asia. And I counted the number of novels by popular Irish writers being sold in that international airport bookshop. I counted 10 popular Irish writers. These are not the James Joyces or the Sean O'Casey's or the highbrow. These are the basic popular novelists. And those novels, of course, also generate images of Ireland. Not always positive images, but nonetheless, I think it's important for Ireland, because those kind of works, which are available all over the world in airport bookshops and bookshops everywhere where English language books are sold, you will find popular novels by Irish authors. And those novels produce images of Ireland which help us to avoid the problem of invisibility, which I referred to earlier as the key danger, the key risk for a small country in the modern world. Another point is that books written in the English language are more likely to be translated into other languages. And if you look at the bestseller list in Germany at the moment, one of the books there is by Cecilia Ahern, who's a popular Irish writer and the daughter of the former Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern, who was here as a speaker at the Institute at a recent conference. If her novel had been written in another less well-known language or less familiar language, the chances of it being translated into German so quickly were probably much reduced. So therefore, the possession of English does give Ireland particular advantages, and we like to present ourselves as an English-speaking country, but with its own very distinctive traditions shaped by our history and by our Gaelic Celtic culture. Another point that I have become conscious of during my career is that the Irish struggle for independence, which took place during the 19th century and came to a head in the period between 1919 and 1921, when we had our War of Independence, and we became independent in 1922. Because we were the first country to break away from one of the European powers that were victorious in the First World War, our story, the Irish story of a struggle to assert Irish political and cultural identity in the face of a much stronger and more powerful neighbouring country, that story became inspirational for many countries in Africa and Asia. And when I was in India as a young diplomat in 1980, I frequently came across Indians who told me how important it was that the Irish example had inspired the Indian independence movement, which took place in the 30s and 40s, driven on by Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru. And Nehru, in fact, was a genuine admirer of the Irish independence struggle. I once had lunch with Nehru's sister, who had been ambassador to the UK and to the UN. She was a woman in her 80s. And she said to me, "Oh, you're Irish." And then she quoted by heart a poem by W.B. Yeats. "When you're old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face." This old Indian lady in 1982 could recite a W.B. Yeats poem. And she told me she learned that poem during the Indian independence struggle in the 30s and 40s. And that was, to me, a graphic illustration of the fact that our story, our national story, had gone around the world and had inspired people in faraway India. Let me just talk briefly about economic branding. This is a slide of just a small number of the major international companies that have a significant base in Ireland. Our country is hugely trade dependent. Exports equate to 80% of our GDP. Now, Germany is an economic export powerhouse, and the percentage in Germany is 46%. Now, Germany, of course, exports vastly more than we do, but in proportionate terms, Ireland, 80% of our GDP comes from exports. In Germany's case, it's 46%. And this demonstrates the extent to which our country is export-driven. And the fact that you have exports means that you are connected with the wider world. And the reason we have such a strong export base is because companies like these have, over the last 20 years, located themselves in Ireland. As you can see, they're responsible for 240,000 jobs in Ireland, which is about 20% or 15% of the total workforce works for companies like these, foreign companies, including some from Germany. So, for example, the investment by foreign companies in Ireland amounts to 85% of our GDP. The European average is 45%. So you can see that in terms of exports and investment, our connections with the wider world are actually proportionately stronger and more important than they are for any other European country, practically. I want to just show you another quote here. What's happened here now? I seem to be stuck. Anyway. Oh yeah, this is probably another one that doesn't work. This is the video one as well. Anyway. Right. This is our Prime Minister speaking last year at a conference we held for the Global Irish, what we call the Global Irish. I believe that being Irish holds a distinct and intrinsic value. Our country, her landscape, and her culture are known the world over. We must develop and renovate that brand and use it in order to give us a competitive advantage in a globalized world. In other words, he sees the culture and the landscape as a positive economic factor. And he says, we ourselves must portray the positives that people see in us. He was trying to advise people to avoid excessive negativity, because at that time, of course, we were in the midst of the financial and economic crisis, which has improved since then for Ireland. But he was talking about the importance for us as a country with very strong global connections, the importance for us of our culture and our landscape. Now, this is another quote from a paper that sorry, just one further point. one of the challenges for Ireland is that I showed you the logos of all of those companies that are active in Ireland. The problem is we lack an iconic native Irish brand. We don't have an Irish Nokia, for example. We don't have the image the Swiss have generated by their big banks and, I suppose, by Swiss watches and so forth. The Irish products that people normally think about are Guinness, whiskey, and butter. Now, these are wonderful Irish products, and especially if you're trying to have fun, but they come from more traditional sectors of the economy. And they do not reflect the diversity and the technological advancement of the modern Irish economy. And I'm often amused when people here assume that our main export to Germany consists of whiskey, when in fact this fine Irish product only represents a tiny percentage of the 5 billion in exports that we have to Germany. The main items being IT products, pharmaceutical products, chemicals, medical devices, and services. So the problem is that we are identified with Guinness and whiskey and butter. But the reality of Ireland is quite different. The dilemma is that those products, the butter, the whiskey, and the Guinness, are part of the reason why, for example, 500,000 Germans visit Ireland every year. So when you're branding, it's a very complex operation to try and convey the modern reality of Ireland, but not losing the cuddly, friendly image generated by the Irish pub and by pints of Guinness and people drinking whiskey. And when we had an open day at the embassy recently, we had 2 open days, and both were covered by German television. And in each case, what they focused on was the whiskey and the Guinness. So there are certain things that are very difficult to get away from, and you don't want to abandon them because they actually are quite valuable. But you want to try and enlarge the image. You want to try and, it's a page, it has Guinness and whiskey on it. You'd like to have high technology written there as well, but it's quite difficult to do that. It's quite difficult to adjust the image of a country without losing some of the things that you have had for a long time and which are a very valuable part of your image. So our challenge really is to update the images of Ireland that are prevalent in different parts of the world, but without losing the value embedded in these more traditional images. And it is no small task to present a complex picture of a society that combines the traditional and the contemporary in the way we like to think that our country does. Sorry, there's one more quote. This is the St. Patrick's Day festival. It's a bit blurred, but anyway. I wanted to talk briefly about cultural branding. And I have a quote here. A strong and well-rooted cultural heritage strengthens a country's reputation, presenting it as a society characterized by innovation, creativity, ingenuity, talent, and imagination, qualities which can also point in the direction of ability in other fields, such as science and technology, and which can contribute to giving the country an image that is attractive to tourists, but also to business people, investors, researchers, and creative individuals. In the Irish case, we are fortunate to have a strong tradition in film, music, and literature, which over the years has helped to present Ireland internationally and to give us far more visibility than a country of 4 million people or 6 million on the island of Ireland could possibly expect to have. Hollywood films, for example, have for many decades conveyed powerful images of Ireland. Not always the images that the government would necessarily have sought to project, but nonetheless. For example, The Quiet Man, an old film starring John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. could probably look it up on the internet, probably get it on Google, or it's probably in some archive. But that film inspired generations of American tourists to visit Ireland. They wanted to see the place where The Quiet Man was filmed. And it presented a very old-fashioned, even at the time when it was made in the 40s, it was a very old-fashioned image of Ireland. Now, of course, it's like Stone Age image. But nonetheless, that brought hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans over the years to visit our country. Ryan's Daughter was another Hollywood movie that had a similar impact. And I am amazed at the number of people I meet whose knowledge of Irish history is drawn from Neil Jordan's film Michael Collins, which is a major Hollywood film starring Liam Neeson. And a huge number of people that I have met over the years have said, "Oh yes, I know about your struggle. I saw it in Michael Collins." Now, Michael Collins is a fine movie. It's a fine film. It's very accurate. I'm a historian myself, and I would say it's very accurate. But of course, it's a Hollywood movie, and it wasn't made by the government. Therefore, it doesn't carry all the messages that I might write as a government official, I might want to project to the world. But it does, nonetheless, help us to avoid the scourge of invisibility, which is the key problem for small countries. Irish literature had a great 20th century. We had Irish writers won 4 Nobel Prizes, and James Joyce's Ulysses, he didn't win a Nobel Prize, but he probably should have, was the most highly regarded English-language novel of the 20th century. Now, literature does not always convey an entirely positive image of the country it describes. And there was a time when Irish people, when Irish officials and ambassadors and government ministers would have been a little bit hostile to James Joyce's portrait of Ireland. However, my contention is, sorry, this is one of my younger colleagues put this together for me. This is just a collage of contemporary Irish musicians. Neo Super Vital, I understand, is a very well-known and internationally recognized DJ. He does techno music or whatever. Yes Boy Ice Cream is an Irish indie record label which has had a number of successful records. The Blizzards are an Irish indie band. U2, of course, are a global phenomenon. And Snow Patrol are also very well-known. And I could have put 1,000 images up here. There are huge numbers, the Cranberries, the Corrs, Van Morrison, and so forth. There's a whole host of Irish musicians, writers, singers who have brought images of Ireland to the wider world. I take the view that the poems of W.B. Yeats and Seamus Heaney, the novels and short stories of James Joyce, the plays of Sean O'Casey, Samuel Beckett, and John Millington Synge, which continue to be performed throughout the world, represent precious assets for Ireland. They do bring people into contact with Ireland. They give people an appreciation of Ireland, which we wouldn't have if those writers had never written. And these are just, this is Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. Oscar Wilde, a man that we might have been negative about before, but now is an icon of Dublin tourism. This is Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, probably one of the most significant cultural artifacts of the 20th century. And this is James Joyce, the classic European Irishman who lived most of his life on the European mainland in France, Switzerland, and Italy, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And these are the 4 Irish Nobel Prize winners: W.B. Yeats, top left; George Bernard Shaw, top right; Samuel Beckett, bottom left; and my old friend Seamus Heaney, whom I met at the airport recently on my last visit back to Dublin, and is in very good spirits. He just passed his 70th birthday, and he's talking about coming to Berlin at some time, so I'm hoping he'll make the visit during my time here. I want to just briefly talk about political branding. Ireland's history of struggle, which I mentioned earlier, to assert our independent political and cultural identity, has given our worldview a set of characteristics which are distinctively Irish. Now, I'm not saying these are only found in Ireland, but nonetheless, let me list them. In the past, a strong anti-colonial tradition that translated into consistent support for the freedom of nations in Africa and Asia, which had previously been under colonial domination. Non-involvement in military alliances. Commitment to playing a central role in the European Union. Protection of human rights. Active involvement in peacekeeping over a 50-year period. Priority attached to disarmament, as evidenced by involvement from the outset in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and our most recent advocacy of international action against cluster munitions, and a commitment to development aid manifested by a successful aid programme. And our aid programme, even though we've gone through this difficult couple of years of economic crisis, our aid programme is currently 0.5% of GDP, and I think we're the number 6 or 7 in the world in GDP per capita terms. These are all a legacy of Irish history, and I think they're an important legacy because we, for example, when we sought membership of the UN Security Council in the year 2000, we were elected with a huge majority because our image as a country that sympathized with developing countries, in particular with countries who were seeking to free themselves from colonial domination, meant that we had a very positive image in the global political diplomatic community. The final point I want to make is about the global Irish. There are about 80 million people of Irish descent throughout the world. This is just an image of some of our peacekeeping missions, Liberia, Kosovo, and most recently in Chad. Mass emigration took place from Ireland between the 1840s and the 1950s. And this means we have 80 million people of Irish descent throughout the world. Recently, last year, we decided that the relationship with our Irish diaspora, the Irish overseas, the global Irish, was too sentimental. It wasn't a modern relationship. It was based on old images of Ireland and sentimentality and so forth. So we decided to try to create a new relationship with the overseas Irish. And we invited 200 influential Irish people living abroad or people of Irish descent. So we had, for example, the former chairman of Intel, we had the CEO of Qantas Airline in Australia, the CEO of British Airways. We had a whole heap of very significant Irish people who have made a real mark for themselves in other parts of the world. We also brought back people of Irish descent who had a connection with Ireland. And these people were brought back, and almost all of them accepted the government's invitation. We were amazed. We thought, we'll invite 200, we might get 100, we might get 70. We got 200 people. In the end, we had to limit the numbers because we couldn't fit them all in. We wanted to get ideas from these people about how we could develop the Irish brand in the 21st century. And to my great surprise, most of these people were business people. There were some artists and performers, but 75–80% were probably from the broad business community. And to my amazement, one of the key recommendations from this forum was the importance of Irish culture to the image of Ireland abroad. So here we had people, hard-headed business people, telling us, if you want to brand yourself, you don't do it through business efforts, you do it through culture. And they encouraged us to make a renewed effort to try to communicate Irish culture, to try and bring Irish culture, promote Irish culture on a global level. St. Patrick's Day, obviously, is a major opportunity for Ireland to brand ourselves. Fifth Avenue closes down on the 17th of March, Fifth Avenue in New York, and it's taken over by the Irish. This is a huge opportunity. Of all the national days in the world, apart from the French National Day, which is famous, the American National Day, most national days are only recognized, celebrated by the people in that country. The Irish National Day, St. Patrick's Day, is celebrated globally. I took part this year in a parade down the main street of Munich in a carriage, sitting beside the Lord Mayor of Munich, with people on the side of the road waving Irish flags. Most of them were Germans, but they came out because they recognized something in St. Patrick's Day they wanted to be associated with. They saw it as good fun. They saw it as something worth being associated with. So, finally, the world of the 21st century is densely crowded with competing images of a bewildering variety and complexity. Never before has so much information and so many images been so readily available to so many. At a time when there was such an amazing multiplicity of web-based media operating across national boundaries, nation-states can no longer enjoy the same degree of influence they did in the past. In a world where ideas, products, services, and investment flow freely around the world, national branding is probably more important than ever. Tourists, investors, and importers, among others, need to be provided with reasons why they should deal with Ireland in preference to the many other countries with which we compete. Small nations have always had to work hard to assert themselves. Many small nations didn't survive the ravages of history. Some did. Why did they do so? Very difficult to say. Each case was probably different. I put up an Irish saying here. Those who are not strong need to be clever. So I would have 4 things to say, 4 lessons to draw from Ireland's experience. First, a national brand is a complex, continually evolving reality that cannot be created or reshaped overnight. It does, however, need to be managed and nurtured. Second, cultural resources are vital in forming and communicating a unique national brand. In Ireland's case, our traditional culture, combined with a distinctive Irish voice in the English language, represent vital promotional resources which we try to make full use of in promoting our national brand. Thirdly, there's only so much that government authorities can do. Much of what people learn about a country will come from non-governmental sources. The role of government is to nurture a country's reputation by seeking to correct damaging misperceptions, especially in the economic area, and to cultivate positive images, but of course, without losing sight of reality. Cultural diplomacy can never be propaganda trying to sell something that doesn't exist. You can only brand something if it exists. Reality is the first requirement. Pretending to be what you're not is a road to nowhere. Careful monitoring of and rapid reaction to inaccurate portrayals in the international media is vital. And we have been doing that very successfully the last couple of years. We started to get negative stories about Ireland. We set up a unit in Dublin to try and respond to those negative stories. And we've been very successful, I think, in turning things around. But also, of course, we've only been successful because the economy has started to turn around. So the reality is also changing. But you can help the reality. You can help perceptions of the reality to catch up more quickly. Because sometimes people have an image and it stays with them for years. You have to constantly update the image people have. That's why it's important to be active in the international media. Fourth, web-based media can offer smaller countries new opportunities for international promotion by adopting creative approaches to national branding. In other words, it doesn't cost that much to produce a clever piece of national branding on the internet. And happily, large countries have no monopoly of creative wisdom. Small nations need friends. You make friends and keep them by engaging in dialogue and by listening to the views of others. And this is why, I mentioned there earlier, we've established this Global Irish Economic Forum. We've also established, out of that, a Global Irish Network, which brings together people, Irish people and people of Irish descent, and engages in a two-way conversation with them about the future development of Brand Ireland. These efforts that I mentioned. Because most of the people who were at that meeting in Dublin last year, the Global Irish Economic Forum, most of them were people from countries with large traditional Irish communities, the United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, so forth. These efforts, therefore, are efforts at refurbishing and redeveloping and renovating the Irish brand in order to deal with the reputational problems that arose in the last few years because of the economic crisis. These efforts have mainly been concentrated in countries with large communities of Irish heritage. For me, the challenge for the future is to raise awareness of Ireland in those parts of the world, places of increasing economic significance in Asia in particular, but also Latin America, where invisibility continues to pose a risk for a small European country like Ireland. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions or engage in a dialogue. Somebody must have. Yes. Yes.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, I can appreciate your being a proponent of soft power. I was kind of surprised you didn't mention the Irish who had pugilistic skills. So during your presentation, during your speech or presentation, I went to the internet and I wanted to find out who were the famous Irish boxers.
Yeah.
John L. Sullivan, yes. Jack Dempsey, Jimmy Braddock, Gene Tunney, and Tom Sharkey. And I said, wow, I know these names.
Yeah.
And then I looked again, they were all born in America.
Yeah.
So tying into the statement you made about the diaspora, I started thinking, I said, wow, I just named the top 5, and then there's another one, Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if people in this audience know it or not, but Muhammad Ali has relatives in Ireland.
Correct.
And he was invited to the city.
He was.
Yes.
He went there last year.
And my question to you is, when are they going to extend the list of the top 5 to the top 6, and will Muhammad Ali be on that list?
Thank you very much. Well, actually, you may not realize this, but your current president, Barack Obama, is also of Irish descent. Yes, but in fact, I should have brought a clip of this, but there's an Irish group that has made a disc, and it's I won't try and sing it for you, but it's the chorus is "There's no one as Irish as Barack Obama," which I'm sure is not quite true, but anyway, it's a good idea, it's a good slogan, and apparently he has heard this song, and he's now determined to come to Ireland so that these people can sing it for him live in his ancestral homeland in Offaly, which happens to be the home place of our Prime Minister as well, Brian Cowan. So there you are. Thank you for your astute observation. Well, there are 40 million people of Irish descent in the United States, and many of them identify strongly with Ireland, which is not always the case for immigrant communities, but the Irish in America have kept their connections with Ireland going back to the 19th century, when they were a very important asset to Ireland in our effort to assert our right to political independence. Next question, please.
Thank you. My name is Shibli Navhan. I'm a communications consultant based in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. Your Excellency, I'd like to ask a question that's relative to many smaller countries, like Norway, like Belgium, like Ireland, like Canada, countries that are closer to other larger countries. So the question is, how does a country like, for example, Norway, say, we are not Sweden? How does a country like Belgium say, no, we are not Dutch? How does a country like Canada say, a musician like Bryan Adams is not American, he's Canadian? And how does a country like Ireland say that Yeats is not an English author, that Snow Patrol and U2 are not British bands. What exactly is the strategy? Is there a strategy for differentiating a country like Ireland from its larger neighbours? Thank you.
Well, that's a very difficult thing to do. And another example, I think, which has been very successful in recent years is New Zealand, which in the past, I think, would have been regarded as a sort of a version of Australia in some way by the outside world. New Zealand has been very effective in branding themselves as a distinctive country of 4 million people in the South Pacific with a really interesting landscape and a vibrant culture. So it's not impossible for a country, because had a real problem in trying to do that, and they've done it. And I think I was reading some literature on branding there in the last few days, and I think they have actually managed to establish a brand New Zealand very effectively. I think that in the Irish case, we were perhaps assisted by the fact that Ireland's difficult relationship with Britain is reasonably widely understood. Unfortunately, the Northern Ireland troubles, which continued between 1969 and until recent years, when the peace process successfully, I think, resolved those or helped to resolve those problems. I think that certainly did tend to, in the Irish case, create a kind of a dichotomy between Britain and Ireland, which it doesn't apply in other cases, clearly. But we've had to, in particular, on our open day recently, I noticed a lot of people who came through the embassy. We have these posters of the major Irish writers on the wall at the embassy. And a lot of people actually gathered around these posters, and I could hear them asking or saying, "Oh, I didn't know he was Irish. I didn't know that writer was Irish." So clearly there is a problem there. We have tried to do everything we can to ensure that the Irish writers, the writers who are Irish, are claimed by Ireland. As I say, in the past we might have been a bit ambivalent about some of them. But, for example, Oscar Wilde is now, there's a wonderful monument to Oscar Wilde on Merrion Square in Dublin, and he is he's on the cover of Gay Dublin Tourism, for example, which, wouldn't have happened 20, 30 years ago, even maybe 10 years ago. So, we have tried to claim our writers as our own. But you're right, it's not easy to do so, and the further away you go, and that's why I said at the end there that one of the challenges for us, I think in European terms, we've probably managed to carve out a specific niche for ourselves and within the English-speaking world. But what of Asia? What of China? What of India? And these are going to be increasingly important forces in the world of the coming years. And it's clearly going to be more challenging for a country like Ireland to differentiate itself to an audience in China. India is a special case because of the relationship that I mentioned of the independence movement inspiring the Indian counterpart. It may be easier for Indians to respond to Ireland. But China, Southeast Asia, there are places where we are going to have to find ways of branding ourselves with a distinctive brand that's not just seen as an extension of the Anglo-American world.
Mr. Ambassador, I would like to thank you very, very much for your presentation. Unfortunately, we're already a little bit over schedule, so I think at this